A while back, I decided to actually go through the research on mindfulness, the actual peer-reviewed studies. For this video, I went through around a dozen recent sources, including meta-analysis, systematic reviews, neuroscience reviews, clinical psychology papers, and newer empirical studies, mostly from the last couple of years. I'm not going to turn this into a list of papers, but I will leave the main source in the description. Out of everything I read, 7 findings stayed with me. Some confirmed things I had half suspected, some were more uncomfortable, and one helped explain why some people start paying more attention to their inner life and end up feeling worse, not better. That one comes up early. If you're new here, this channel is where I make quiet videos about awareness, inner patterns, and what it feels like to pay attention to your life. If that's the kind of a space you want more of, you can subscribe. Now back to the research. The real mechanism. The finding I keep coming back to is this. Mindfulness doesn't appear to work primarily by making people calmer. One 2024 meta-analysis covering 57 studies and over 18,000 participants tried to map out how mindfulness actually reduces psychological distress. And the largest pathway ran through something called decentering, the ability to observe a thought or emotion as an event in the mind rather than as a verdict about who we are. The shift is not from having thoughts to having no thoughts. It's from this thought is me to this thought is happening in me. That matters a lot for rumination, for shame, for the way a bad moment tends to expand into something larger about who we are. The protective form of self-awareness isn't about seeing more of yourself. It's about becoming less fused with what you see. The awareness trap. Here's the part that surprised me most. Almost everything in mainstream mindfulness content rests on a quiet assumption that awareness is inherently beneficial, that paying more attention to your inner life will make you healthier. That noticing is the thing. But one pattern the research kept returning to complicated that. Studies tracking people in their actual daily lives found that the monitoring and observing parts of mindfulness were associated with amplified stress reactivity in some participants, not lower, higher. What actually buffered this stress was acceptance, specifically non-judgment and non-reactivity. If you have ever tried to just notice a feeling and found yourself getting more anxious, more tangled up, this is probably why. Noticing without allowing doesn't feel like observation anymore. It starts to feel like surveillance. The move the research keeps pointing to isn't look harder, it is look and allow. Not passive, that's the common misread. Allowing is what keeps secondary struggle from piling onto primary distress. Unhooking in real time. There's a related idea that gets misread more than almost anything else in this space. It's called non-attachment. And most people hear that word and think it means caring less, more distant from your experience. The research doesn't support that reading. Some experience sampling studies suggest that non-attachment changes how thoughts and emotion get tied together in real time. One finding suggested that non-attachment actually mediated the relationship between present moment mindfulness and whether people ended up feeling better or worse that day. What that points to is not emotional distance. It's more like what happens after decentering. Decentering lets you see the thought as a thought. Non-attachment is the part where you do not keep gripping it. A defensive thought shows up and you notice it before building a whole case around it. The inner event is still there. It just doesn't get to become the whole story. I think about what you might call glue moments, the small everyday moments when an experience is quietly in the process of becoming a definition. When I felt embarrassed just now is on its way to becoming, I'm the kind of person who always does that. Non-attachment isn't about avoiding those moments. It's about having a bit more room inside them. The brain. not quieting, reorganizing. There's a popular image of what mindfulness does to the brain. It quiets everything down and clears the internal noise. But the neuroscience point to something more interesting. Recent reviews of brain imaging studies suggest that mindfulness is less like turning one part of the brain off, and it's more like changing how different systems work together. The default mode network, which is often involved in the inner commentary about me, seems to become less dominant. Emotional reactivity appears to soften, and systems involved in attention, body awareness, and self-control seem to work together in a more flexible way. So the true narrative self doesn't disappear, and the shift is from one system running the whole show to something more balanced. Your body. One finding I found nuanced was about the body. The research suggests mindfulness may not reliably make people more accurate at detecting internal signals like heartbeat, tension, and physical sensation. But what does seem to change more consistently is people's relationship to those signals, how they interpret them, and how frightened they are by them. Let's talk about a concrete example. You feel tightness in your chest before a difficult conversation. You do not need to deny the real sensation, but then the mind adds a layer. This will go badly, and suddenly you are not just feeling your body, you are reacting to what your mind thinks about the body means. That's a different message from listen to your body. It's not that the body becomes clearer. It's that your response to what you're already hearing becomes less automatic. Frequency over duration. Research following meditators over time has found that how often someone practiced was a stronger predictor of positive outcomes than how long any given session was. That reframes things. Most of the cultural conversation around mindfulness is built around session length, like the 45-minute sit, the 10-day retreat. Those can be valuable, but if frequency matters more than duration, the real unit might be interruption. Brief, repeated contact with what's actually happening in the middle of real life, not just in set-aside time, seems to be where a lot of the consolidation happens. The part nobody discusses. I want to say something I don't hear often enough in this kind of content. Mindfulness is not automatically the right starting point for everyone. Recent clinical reviews have documented adverse effects, anxiety, depression, traumatic re-experiencing in a meaningful percentage of people who practice regularly, with a smaller but real proportion reporting lasting functional impairment. And research, specifically looking at the people with trauma histories, has found they can be more likely to experience worse outcomes in standard mindfulness programs. This doesn't mean mindfulness is bad or harmful by nature, but it does mean that turning inward without support or without appropriate pacing can be difficult for some people. Close. What keeps standing out to me is this. The popular version of mindfulness is mostly about feelings, about calm or peace, or arriving somewhere less turbulent. The version that shows up in the research is more structural. It's about the relationship between a thought and the self that receives it. It's about the difference between observing and fusing. It's about networks and pacing and permission. Mindfulness is not deeper self-absorption. It is a different relationship with what appears inside us. If you want to look at any of the specific studies, I will put the links in the description. And if this kind of video is useful to you, subscribing is the best way to stay in this conversation. This is Here and Human. I will see you in the next video.